Chapter 1. The Woman Who Built It Quietly. I used to believe that if you worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and did everything right, the truth would protect you. I was wrong. I joined Northline Secure AI between 2017 and 2019, thinking I was building something that mattered, not realizing I was slowly erasing myself from my own work. My name disappeared long before I ever walked out the door, and by the time I noticed, silence had already been mistaken for surrender. I joined Northline Secure AI sometime between 2017 and 2019, back when I still believed the right work could speak for itself. Seattle was wet that week, the kind of rain that did not fall hard but never really stopped. And I remember standing outside the glass front doors with my badge in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other, watching my reflection blur in the windows. I had left a steady job on purpose, not because I was chasing status or a bigger title, but because I wanted to build something real, something that would matter when the noise faded. My name is Marin Caldwell. I was 41 when I walked into that lobby for the first time, and I told myself I was done performing. I had spent years in rooms where the loudest person became the leader, where credit was treated like a prize you wrestled for. At Northline, they promised something different. They said they valued substance. They said they rewarded quiet excellence. They said they were building a security platform that could protect people who would never know my name, and I liked that. I liked the idea of being useful without being visible. On my first day, the office smells like fresh paint and new furniture. The walls were a confident white, the kind that made everyone look sharper than they were. People moved fast, carrying laptops, talking about deadlines and investor updates, and I noticed how easy it was to get swept up in that rhythm. I kept my head down anyway. That was my habit. If you worked hard enough, stayed reliable enough, eventually someone had to see you. I was hired to architect the core intelligence behind a system we started calling Lantern Core. The name sounded harmless, almost gentle, but what we were building was meant to be ruthless. A security brain that could learn patterns, spot threats, and respond before the damage landed. Not just external attacks, not just strangers on the other side of the world, but the quiet risks that came from inside the house. Because in my experience, the most dangerous things rarely arrived wearing a mask. They arrived with a familiar face, a trusted badge, a key that already fit the lock. I did not tell many people that last part. I did not tell them it was personal. I had learned young that when you explain too much, people decide you are emotional. I preferred being precise. My mother would have approved of that. Judith Caldwell raised me to keep my voice soft and my expectations softer. She taught elementary school for 3 decades outside Spokane, and she had a way of making endurance sound like a virtue. When I called her that first week in Seattle, she asked if I was sleeping, if I was eating, if my rent was too expensive. She told me she was proud. Then, the way she always did when things mattered, she reminded me not to make trouble. I told her I was not planning to. I said I just wanted to do my job. My brother Ryan called the next day. He works construction, the kind of job that leaves your hands rough and your patience shorter than it used to be. He asked why I left something stable. He said I was already safe and did not need to gamble. He said a lot of things that sounded like concern, but felt like warning. I let him say them. I told him I had it under control. And I meant it. At least in the way I had always meant it. I knew how to survive. I knew how to bend without breaking. At Northline, survival looked like consistency. I came in early and stayed late, not because anyone ordered me to, but because I couldn't stand leaving a problem half-solved. I wrote documentation nobody asked for. I reviewed other teams' code, patched holes before they became headlines. When people thanked me, I nodded and went back to my desk. When they forgot, I did the same. That was the version of me everyone liked. Dependable, quiet, useful. Graham Voss, our CEO, noticed the useful part immediately. Graham had a practiced kind of warmth. He smiled with his whole face, asked questions that sounded personal, remembered small details. He would stop by my workstation with his sleeves rolled up, like he had just come from building something himself. He would say he appreciated what I was doing. He would say the company needed people like me. He would say we were all in this together. Sometimes he would rest a hand on the back of my chair as he talked, like we were old friends. I always sat a little straighter when he did, not because I enjoyed it, but because I understood the instinct behind it. People touched what they believed they owned. I did not think that thought the first month, maybe not even the third. I was busy. Lantern Core was a puzzle with 1,000 moving parts, and I loved the work in the way you love something that demands your full attention. There is relief in focusing on something that can be fixed, because so much of life cannot be. The first red flag did not look like danger. It looked like a meeting. We were gathered in a conference room with a whiteboard full of arrows and acronyms. Product, engineering, security, leadership, all of us squeezed around a table with stale pastries in the center. Evan Mercer, our head of product, was running through a roadmap slide. He was smart, polished, the kind of man who could make a delay sound like strategy. At one point, he gestured at a diagram I'd drawn weeks earlier, the architectural spine of Lantern Core, and he called it a team milestone. I waited for him to say my name. He did not. When the meeting ended, a junior engineer slapped me lightly on the shoulder and said the roadmap looked great. I thanked him because that's what I do. I walked back to my desk and told myself it was fine, that credit would come later, that we were too early for that kind of detail, that it was startup culture, fast and messy, and I wouldn't be the person to slow it down by needing recognition. The second red flag looked like praise. Graham announced in an all-hands that Lantern Core was advancing faster than expected. He praised the engineering team broadly. He called out the energy in the building, the commitment, the grit. People clapped. Someone cheered. My cheeks warmed the way they do when attention passes near you, even if it doesn't land. Afterward, Graham caught me near the coffee machine and said he was impressed. He said my work was changing the company's trajectory. He asked if I felt supported. I told him I did. Then I asked a careful question, the kind that could be dismissed as casual. I asked how the company planned to recognize the architecture work as we moved toward investor demonstrations. I asked what ownership would look like on paper, not just in speeches. Graham smiled, as if I asked about snacks for the next meeting. He said we would talk about it soon. He said the company took care of its people. He said we shouldn't worry. He said, almost laughing, we were all on the same side. Then he changed the subject. He asked about my weekend. He asked if Seattle rain bothered me. He asked if I found a good place to eat. I let him. That was the part I hate admitting, even to myself. I let him redirect me. I told him he was busy. I told him it was normal. I told myself I was being too cautious. I told myself the same thing my mother had always told me, just dressed up in different words. Don't make trouble. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into the kind of stretch of time you only notice after you've lived through it. I started measuring my life in sprints and releases. I started forgetting what day it was. I started eating at my desk because it felt inefficient to leave. And Lantern Core began to feel alive. Not literally, not in the way people say to make a product sound magical, but in the way a system becomes more than the sum of its parts. It started catching things earlier. It started correlating signals that would have slipped past a human reviewer. It started making the right noise, the kind that tells you it's paying attention. One afternoon, we ran an internal validation that had been circled on the calendar for weeks. The room we used was small, windowless, packed with monitors and cables, and someone had taped a handwritten sign to the door telling people not to interrupt. I sat with my laptop open, palms damp, trying to keep my breathing steady. Evan stood behind me with his arms crossed. 2 security engineers hovered near the server rack like nervous parents. When the test began, the screens filled with simulated traffic, a storm of requests and anomalies designed to confuse the system. Lantern Core watched it all, quiet at first, then alert. It flagged an access pattern that didn't belong. It isolated the vector. It cut the pathway before the simulated breach could spread. It did it quickly, cleanly, without the frantic overreaction that usually makes systems collapse under stress. Someone behind me exhaled hard, like they had been holding their breath the entire time. Evan leaned forward and said it was better than he expected. One of the security engineers grinned and said this could change everything. My throat tightened. I stared at the results on the screen, at the clean lines, the clear decisions, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to relief. We had something. Not a promise, not a concept, not a slide deck. We had something real. That evening, Graham sent an email to the company praising the milestone and mentioning that we were prepared for investor-facing demonstrations soon. People reacted with emojis and congratulations in the company chat. My phone buzzed with messages from coworkers celebrating, and I sat alone in my apartment with my laptop still open, rereading the validation summary like I was afraid it would disappear. I thought about calling my mother. I imagined her voice softening, imagined her saying she knew I could do it. I thought about Ryan, imagined him pretending he had not doubted me. I thought about the way Graham had looked at me when he praised the team, and how, despite everything, I still wanted to believe him. I went to bed that night with a strange, quiet optimism in my chest, the kind that feels like light through a cracked door. I told myself that the hard part was behind me, that the work had spoken, and that soon, finally, someone would have to listen. Chapter 2. When Loyalty Met the Contract. The next morning, the calendar invite landed with a soft chime that felt too polite for what it was. A meeting at 10. Mandatory. Private. Title: QuickSync. I stared at it longer than I should have, waiting for a second line, a hint of what it was about, a note that said congratulations, a note that said thank you, a note that said your name. There was nothing, just 3 attendees: Graham Voss, Diane Halpern, me. I knew Diane by sight, everyone did. She moved through the office like a locked door. General counsel, always dressed in clean lines, always carrying a slim folder as if she had never needed more than one. She did not come to demos. She did not come to sprint reviews. She appeared when something needed to be contained. At 9:45, I walked to the conference room with my laptop tucked against my chest like armor. The hallway was loud with normal work sounds, keyboards, laughter, a call echoing from a glass pod. I kept thinking, this is just paperwork. This is the part where it becomes official. Evan Mercer passed me near the kitchen. He was holding a protein bar and talking to someone from marketing. When he saw me, his smile hesitated. "Big day," he said, and his voice was bright in the way people get when they are trying to glue something back together. "Yeah," I said, "I think it is." He nodded too fast. He did not ask where I was going. The conference room was small and windowed, with a view of the parking lot and the edge of the freeway. Diane was already there, seated with a stack of papers in front of her. Graham stood near the whiteboard, sleeves rolled up, his posture casual, his expression warm. He looked up as I answered and smiled like we were about to celebrate. "Marin," he said, "sit down. Thanks for coming in." I sat. I set my laptop on the table, but did not open it. Diane slid a pen toward me without looking at my face. Graham clasped his hands and leaned slightly forward. "First," he said, "I want you to know what you built is extraordinary. Lantern Core is going to be the backbone of this company." I felt my shoulders loosen a fraction, the reflexive relief of hearing praise attached directly to my work. He continued, "We are moving into a new phase. Investor discussions, commercialization, partnerships. We need to formalize roles and ownership so everything is clean." Clean. That word sat on my tongue like metal. Diane opened her folder. Her voice was even, almost gentle, as if she were leading a bedtime story. "This is an acknowledgement and assignment of intellectual property. Standard. It confirms that all work product created in the scope of employment is the exclusive property of Northline Secure AI. I blinked. I waited for the part where it said, and it names Marin Caldwell as the architect. I waited for the part where it said, and it grants a bonus. I waited for the part where it said, and it protects you. Diane kept reading. She did not glance up. She read clauses that sounded like a world made of paper. Work product, inventions, derivative works, confidential information, all rights, all title, all interests. My name appeared once, not as the creator, just as the employee. I looked at Graham. He watched me the way people watch a weather report, attentive, patient, slightly removed. I said, I thought we were talking about recognition, about formal credit. Graham smiled softly. This is part of it, he said. This is how the company recognizes the work, by moving it into the company portfolio, making it real for investors. Diane turned a page. She said, Your employment agreement already includes these terms. This document simply confirms them because Lantern Corps has reached a material milestone. Material milestone. It sounded like a verdict. I felt heat climb up my neck. The room did not change, but something inside me did. The sharp awareness of being managed. I heard my own heartbeat. I saw the pen in front of me. I wanted to push the papers back. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say, you are not going to do this like it is nothing. A memory flashed. A woman at my last job. A senior engineer who raised her voice in a meeting after months of being ignored. People called her unstable. People called her hard to work with. She was gone 3 months later. I swallowed. I forced my hands to rest flat on the table. I said, Lantern Corps is not a team effort, not at the architecture level. You know that. Graham exhaled like he was disappointed in the weather. Marin, he said, the team contributed, everyone contributed, and we need unity right now. We need to present as one company. I looked at Diane. I said, Is there a section that names me as the system architect? Diane paused. Not long, but long enough to make the pause feel intentional. This is not a credits document. It is a legal assignment. Graham leaned in again. His voice turned more personal. I know this feels abrupt, he said, but this is how it works. This is business. We have to protect the company. Protect the company. From me, I thought, but I did not say it. Then he said the sentence that changed the air. We are going to move forward with Lantern Corps under a different leadership structure. Effective immediately, you will no longer be on the core development team. I stared at him. My mouth opened, but nothing came out for a second. I said, What? Graham held a hand, calming, friendly. Not fired, he said. Let me be clear. We value you. We just need you in a different capacity. Documentation, support, internal consulting. And we are offering you a success compensation package for your contribution. Diane slid another sheet across the table. A number was printed in the center. It was not small, and it was not enough to buy back what I'd poured into that system. I heard myself laugh once, a short sound that surprised me. It did not come from humor. It came from disbelief. I said, You want to pay me to disappear? Graham's smile tightened. We want you taken care of, he said. We want you to feel appreciated. But this project is bigger than any one person. I looked at the paper again. The words blurred at the edges. Bigger than any one person. That was the line people used when they wanted to take something without guilt. I felt the impulse rise, fast and dangerous. I could stand up. I could say no. I could threaten to go public. I could call Evan into the room, demand he tell the truth. I could make noise. And then I saw it the way they would see it. The quiet woman finally snapping. The difficult woman. The emotional woman. The one who could not handle success. The one who needed to be managed. My mother's voice drifted in. Gentle, worn smooth by years. Don't make trouble with powerful people. I breathed in. I let it out slowly. I kept my voice calm, because calm was the only weapon they would not be able to turn against me. I said, "If I sign this, what exactly happens to my role?" Diane answered, "You transition immediately. Access to core repositories will be removed. You will receive the compensation contingent on compliance and confidentiality." I said, "So I'm erased." Graham frowned like the word offended him. "No," he said, "you're part of the North Line story, always. This is simply operational." Operational, clean, unity. Words that sounded harmless until they were used like knives. I looked at Graham and asked one last question. "Why did you praise me yesterday?" His eyes did not flicker. "Because it was true," he said, "and because I meant it. Marin, you should be proud. You built something incredible." Then Diane nudged the pen closer. I signed. My hand moved steadily. My signature looked the same as it always did. That was the strange part. I expected my body to revolt, to shake, to refuse. But I signed like I was approving a timesheet, like I was confirming a meeting time, like I had done this 100 times. Diane gathered the papers. Graham stood and reached for my shoulder as if to comfort me. I stood too fast and his hand landed on air. "We'll announce some restructuring later," he said. "Take the afternoon. Get some rest." I walked out of the room, down the hallway, past the glass pods and the open desks and the bright screens. Nobody looked up. Or maybe they did and looked away. Evan Mercer was at his desk, typing. He glanced up as I passed and his face went careful. "You okay?" he asked, too softly. I nodded once. I kept walking. By the time I reached the elevator, my badge still worked. I pressed the button and watched the numbers light up. I could hear my own breathing inside the small box of mirrored walls. My reflection looked normal, which felt like the cruelest part, like nothing had happened. That weekend, I drove east to see my mother. The air near Spokane was colder than Seattle, drier, the sky wide and pale. My mother made soup and watched me with the kind of quiet attention she used on her students when they were about to cry. I told her, "They moved me off the project." She stirred the pot. She said, "Well, honey, at least they paid you something." I said, "They did not pay me for the work. They paid me to stop being in the way." She sighed. Her shoulders slumped like she had been carrying something invisible for years. "Sometimes you have to let things go. Learn the lesson. Move on. Don't make trouble with powerful people." My brother Ryan called while I was there. I told him what happened in simple sentences. He said, "That is corporate life. You knew what you were signing up for. Just take the money and find somewhere else." I stared at the wall while he talked. I realized with a kind of numb clarity that nobody in my life was going to fight this for me. They would sympathize, they would advise, they would shrink the pain into something manageable, but they would not stand in that room and say my name. On Monday, I returned to Northline. My access to the core systems was gone, exactly as Diane promised. My inbox held a polite message about my new responsibilities. Someone had removed my name from a shared document folder title. Lantern Core continued without me. I sat at my desk, hands folded, listening to the normal sounds of work around me, and the silence inside my chest turned heavy. Not with grief alone, but with something else taking shape underneath it. A thought I did not let myself say out loud yet. If they believed my quiet meant I was harmless, they had not been paying attention. Chapter 3. Silence, Logs, and Preparation. The first thing I did was stop trying to convince anyone to see me. I showed up. I did the new support work they assigned. I answered questions that had nothing to do with what I had built, and I kept my face neutral. People like Evan drifted past my desk with that cautious politeness you use around someone you helped wrong. Graham stopped by once, all friendly concern and practiced warmth. "You doing okay, Marin?" "I'm fine," I said. "Good, that is good. We still need you," he replied, like that should have been comforting. It did not comfort me. It confirmed something. They did not need me. They needed my compliance. When I got home that night, I opened my laptop and stared at my own hands for a long time. Not because I did not know what to do, but because I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I was deciding how to do it without becoming the story they were already drafting about me. 6 months earlier, long before the meeting with Diane, long before the pen slid across the table, I had noticed something that did not fit. It was late, close to midnight, and the office was mostly empty. The lights in the open area had dimmed, the cleaning crew moved quietly at the far end of the floor, and I was alone in the small lab space we used for secure testing. I had built my own environment for Lantern Core, not because I wanted to hide work, but because I understood what any security system is built on: control, boundaries, clean logs, no surprises. That night, a notification popped up on my screen. A new sign-in to a restricted environment, an access request from a device I did not recognize. It was subtle, the kind of alert most people dismiss when they are tired. My first thought was that I had made a mistake. Maybe I had misconfigured something. Maybe one of the engineers needed access and forgot to tell me. Maybe it was nothing. I pulled up the entry, checked the time, checked the source, checked the path. The request was real. Not successful, but real. Someone had tried to step into a room that was not theirs. I remember standing up so fast my chair rolled backward and bumped the wall. My heart was loud in my ears. I walked to the glass door and looked out into the office. No one was there. I sat back down and stared at the screen until the numbers stopped swimming. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself I needed more data. That was when I made my first quiet decision. Not a dramatic one, not a vengeful one, a protective one. If someone inside the building was curious enough to test the lock, then my job was to make sure the lock did what it was supposed to do. And if the lock started noticing patterns, then the lock needed to remember. The next morning, I brought it up carefully with Evan. "Hey, did anyone request access to my secure environment last night?" Evan looked up from his screen, blinked like he had to switch contexts. "Not that I know of. Why?" "I got an access attempt. It failed, but it happened." He frowned, the kind of frown people make when they want a problem to be smaller. "Could be a glitch or a misclick. You know how permissions get messy." "Permissions do not misclick into a restricted environment," I said. He held my gaze for half a second, then looked away. "I will ask around," he said, and his tone made it sound like he would not. I considered going to Graham right then. I even rehearsed the words in my head. "I can show you the alert. I can walk you through the risk. We should tighten internal controls." But I pictured his smile, the way he said unity, the way he avoided specifics, and I pictured Diane appearing like a shadow behind him. I did not go to him, not yet. Instead, I built what I wished I had seen more often in my career: accountability that did not rely on trust. I strengthened the audit trail. I made access alerts clearer. I made it impossible to ignore patterns without leaving fingerprints. I did not add anything flashy. I did not add traps. I built visibility. Lantern Core was designed to catch threats, and threats were not always strangers. Sometimes they were people with a key who should not have been turning the lock. I kept it quiet. I did not announce it in meetings. I did not create drama. I simply made the system better, in a way that aligns with what it was always supposed to be. And then, of course, I questioned myself. That part happened at 2 a.m, alone in my apartment, when the city outside my window went still enough that every sound felt loud. I would replay the alert in my mind and ask whether I was being paranoid. I would think about my mother's voice and wonder if I was turning normal workplace friction into a story of betrayal because I had watched it happen to other people. Sometimes I would text my mother, then delete it before sending. How do you tell someone who believes endurance is love that endurance can also be a cage? One afternoon, Alyssa Kim from compliance stopped by my desk. Alyssa was the kind of person who didn't waste words. She had calm eyes and a careful way of speaking, like she knew every sentence could end up in an email thread later. "Can I ask you something off the record?" she asked. "Sure," I replied. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "Can I ask you something off the record?" I kept my face neutral. I asked, "Why do you ask?" Because I'm getting asked to sign off on things I haven't reviewed, she said, and I'm being told to trust that engineering handled it. I felt something inside me tighten. I built Lantern Core with internal accountability in mind, I said carefully. Alyssa studied me. That's what I suspected, she said, and I think it's going to matter. Does Graham know you're concerned? I asked. Alyssa gave a small smile that did not reach her eyes. I tried, she said. He said we'll circle back. He said we needed to keep momentum for investors. Momentum, that word again. Another harmless word used like a broom to sweep things under a rug. Alyssa straightened. Listen, she said. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying if you ever need someone to confirm that you're not imagining what you're seeing, you're not. After she walked away, I sat very still, letting her words land. You're not imagining it. It was a strange comfort, not because it fixed anything, but because it gave my instincts permission to exist. When the meeting with Diane happened, months later, when Graham smiled and erased me, I understood why that earlier access attempt mattered. It was not a single event. It was a sign of entitlement, a sign that someone believed my work was already theirs before the paperwork made it official. Now, sitting at my desk with my access revoked, I watched the company continue without me, and I thought about the system they were so eager to claim. I thought about what it had learned to see. I did not take anything when I left. I did not copy files. I did not email myself code. I did not do anything that could be twisted into doing wrong. I left clean, because clean is power. My final day came quietly. Diane sent an email confirming my transition was complete and that I would receive the compensation once I returned all equipment and signed a final acknowledgement. I scheduled the handoff like it was any other meeting. Evan found me packing a small box at my desk. Just a mug, a notebook, a framed photo of my mother and brother at a summer barbecue years ago. He hovered like he wanted to say something brave. You didn't deserve that, he said finally. I looked at him. You were in the room when they called it team effort, I replied, and my voice was soft. Yes, you should have. He swallowed and said, What are you going to do now? I could have told him the truth. I could have told him that the hard part wasn't behind me, it was just beginning, but I didn't trust him anymore. I'm going to rest, I said, and then I'm going to decide what comes next. He nodded, but his eyes looked relieved, like he wanted me to disappear without making him feel guilty for longer than a week. In the lobby, the receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile. The elevator doors closed, and my reflection stared back at me again, calm, ordinary, harmless. Outside, the Seattle air was cold and clean. Cars moved along the freeway, people walked dogs, carried groceries, lived their lives without knowing what was happening inside that building. I stood on the sidewalk with my box in my arms and felt the tension settle into something sharper than sadness. Not rage, not chaos, something controlled, something patient. Because if they believed my quiet meant I was harmless, then the next part was going to surprise them. Chapter 4. The system did what it was built to do. A few days after I stood on that sidewalk with my cardboard box, my phone stopped feeling like an object and started feeling like a doorway. I kept it face down on the kitchen counter while I made coffee, while I folded laundry, while I tried to teach my body that it was allowed to unclench. I told myself I would give it a week. I told myself I would sleep. I told myself I would take my mother's advice for once and let the world keep spinning without me. Then, on a Thursday morning, my phone rang. The caller ID said Northline Secure AI. I watched it vibrate against the wood, listened to it ring out once, twice, 3 times, and felt something steady in my chest. Not panic, not hope, recognition. I answered. Hello? I said. For half a second, there was only breathing on the other end. Then Graham Wass spoke, and his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Marin, he said, I need you to come in. I did not respond right away. Marin, he repeated, please. I glanced out my window at the gray Seattle sky. The world looked the same. That was the strange part. Even when your life splits in two, the streetlights still change on schedule. What happened? I asked. Graham swallowed audibly. We have an issue with Lantern Core. We are in the middle of internal testing and it is flagging things, serious things. Flagging, I said. Like what? He hesitated, like he was choosing between lying and admitting the truth. It is generating compliance alerts, he said. It is locking certain flows. The team cannot get around it. I set my coffee mug down carefully. Is it broken? I asked. No, Graham said quickly. No, it is not broken. It is doing something we did not expect. I closed my eyes. I saw the access alert from 6 months ago, the attempt that failed. I saw my hands on a keyboard late at night, tightening visibility, building accountability into the bones of the system. I felt my own calm return, like a key turning in a lock. I will come in, I said, but I am not coming in to be blamed for your problem. There was another pause. I am not blaming you, Graham said. I am asking you, as the person who knows the system best. The person who knows the system best. He could not say architect, not yet. When I arrived at the office, my badge did not work. The security guard looked uncomfortable, like he had been warned to be polite. He called upstairs, spoke in a low voice, then waved me through with a temporary visitor sticker. The lobby smelled the same, fresh coffee and new carpet, like it was always trying to convince someone the future was clean. I followed the guard to the elevator, and my reflection in the mirrored wall looked composed. That was not an accident. I had practiced that face for years. The elevator opened onto the executive floor. Graham was waiting outside the boardroom. Diane Halpern stood beside him, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Evan Mercer hovered farther back, near a glass wall, looking like he wished he could dissolve into it. Graham stepped forward. "Thank you for coming," he said. I did not offer a smile. "Show me," I said. He led me into the boardroom, the same room where I had signed my erasure, same long table, same whiteboard, same view of the freeway, cars gliding by like none of this mattered. A large screen at the end of the room displayed Lantern Core's dashboard. The interface looked familiar, clean and confident. Then I noticed the red. Multiple compliance alerts, internal access conflicts, approval overrides, unverified privilege escalation attempts. It was not a crash, it was a warning. A security engineer I barely recognized stood near the screen, hands on his hips, eyes frantic. "It keeps generating reports," he said. "We clear one and another appears. It's escalating. It is tagging it as high severity. It's also restricting certain deployment pathways." Graham turned to me, trying to keep his voice calm. "Can you stop it?" he asked. I walked closer to the screen and read the alert summaries. They were neutral in language, as if the system didn't care who it was describing. It cared only about behavior. I asked, "When did this start?" The engineer answered, "About 20 minutes into the test run." Diane cut in, her voice controlled. "We are in pre-Series B internal validation," she said. "Investors will expect documentation of our security posture and governance controls. We cannot have a system that implies internal misconduct." "Implies?" I repeated softly. Graham flinched. "Marin, we need this resolved today. We have a board check-in scheduled. We have investor advisors expecting an update. We cannot walk into those rooms with this hanging over us." I turned from the screen and looked at him. I let the silence stretch just long enough that he had to feel it. "It is not hanging over you. It is inside you." Evan made a small sound, like he wanted to speak but didn't dare. Graham's jaw tightened. Diane's eyes sharpened. Diane said, "Are you suggesting the reports are accurate?" I did not answer her question directly. I kept my voice calm. I did not raise it. I did not give them anything they could label. Lantern Core is functioning as designed. The alerts are not traps. They are consequences. Graham stared at me. "Consequences of what?" he asked. I stepped back to the table and set my bag down. I did not sit. Sitting would have made me feel like I was in the same position as before. Lantern Core evaluates risk based on patterns, external and internal. It flags conflicts of access, approvals that don't follow policy, and attempts to override controls without proper authorization. Diane's voice cut across the room. Policy is defined by the company, she said. Yes, and it is also defined by what you told investors you would do, and what you documented, and what you signed. Graham's face went pale in a way he tried to hide. Diane lifted her chin. If this is about your removal from the project, we can discuss that later. Right now, we need the system stable. I looked at her. I saw the same pen, the same paper logic, the same cold containment. This is not revenge. This is the system doing what you claimed you wanted, a secure platform with governance, a platform that cannot be bent quietly by whoever happens to hold cower. Graham exhaled and rubbed his forehead. Marin, just tell us how to fix it. I took a slow breath. This was the moment that could turn ugly if I let it. I could threaten, I could gloat, I could say a dozen cutting truths that would feel good for 5 seconds and cost me everything. So I did what I had always done. I stayed precise. There are 2 parts to this, I said. One is operational, the other is governance. Diane narrowed her eyes. Go on, she said. Operationally, I said, you cannot bypass these flags without validating the access structure and the approval chain. If Lantern Core sees unauthorized override behavior, it will keep escalating. That's the point. It's preventing a compliance failure. Graham's voice was tight. We don't have time for this, he said. You don't have time not to, I replied. The security engineer shifted, uncomfortable. Evans swallowed hard. Diane spoke again, carefully. What is the governance part? She asked. I met her gaze. I removed the person who defined these guardrails, I said. I removed the only person with authority to certify that Lantern Core's compliance settings match the policies you claim to follow. Now, the system is seeing behavior that doesn't match the controls, and there is no legitimate oversight in place to resolve the conflict. Graham opened his mouth, then closed it. I continued, still calm. From a fiduciary perspective, the board has a duty to know whether the company can truthfully represent its security and governance posture. If Lantern Core is generating internal compliance reports during pre-Series B validation and you ignore them, you are creating disclosure risk. Diane's lips pressed into a thin line. You are very confident, she said. I nodded once. I built it, I said. Silence landed like weight on the table. Finally, Graham spoke, quieter. What do you want? He asked. I did not smile. I did not lean in. I did not enjoy it. I simply answered like an adult explaining terms. I want an interim agreement, I said. Not a threat, a lawful option. Recognition of my role as the system architect, ethical oversight authority over Lantern Core governance, technical control necessary to bring the system into compliance, and a signed term sheet that outlines compensation aligned with the value of the work and the risk you created by removing me. Evan's eyes widened. The security engineer looked at Graham, then away. Diane said, That's not something we can do in a moment. You can, I said. Interim, today. You have a board check-in. You can present it as risk mitigation, temporary governance stabilization. You can formalize later, but if you want Lantern Core stable, you need the person who designed its controls to be empowered to resolve what it is flagging. Graham's voice came out rough. If we agree, will you stop the escalation? I looked back at the screen. The alerts were still pulsing, patient and unbothered. The system did not care about our feelings. It cared about integrity. I will bring it into compliance, I said. I will not silence it. I will not make it blind. I will make it accurate, based on a governance structure that can stand in front of a board and investors without lying. Diane's gaze held mine, searching for weakness. And if we do not? She asked. I answered with the truth, not a threat. Then Lantern Corps will continue to record what it sees, I said, and you will have to explain to the board why your own flagship platform is raising internal compliance concerns during a critical funding phase. Graham closed his eyes for a second, like he was tasting something bitter. Diane turned to him and spoke quietly. We can draft an interim term sheet, she said. Limited scope, effective immediately, subject to board review. Graham nodded once, stiffly. Do it, he said. No celebration came over me, no rush of victory, only a steady settling, like a spine straightening after years of slouching. Diane gathered her folder. Evan remained still, as if he did not know whether to feel relieved or ashamed. Graham looked at me, and for the first time since I met him, the warmth in his face was gone. What remained was something closer to respect, or fear, or both. Marin, he said quietly, we will need you back in the building. I picked up my bag. You will need Lantern Corps, to be honest, I said. That is what you are actually asking for. I walked out of the boardroom the same way I had walked out months earlier, but this time the air did not feel like it belonged to them. It felt like it was finally making room for me. And as I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed with a new calendar invite from Diane. Interim governance meeting. Same boardroom, same day, 30 minutes. I stared at the screen for a moment, then slipped the phone into my pocket, breathing evenly, already deciding what I would and would not give them next. Chapter 5. What Peace Looks Like After Truth. By the time I walked back into that boardroom 30 minutes later, the air had changed. Not softer, just sharper, like everyone had finally realized the room had teeth. Diane Halpern sat at the head of the table with her laptop open, a legal pad beside it. Graham Voss stood near the screen, hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels the way he did when he was trying to look calm. Evan Mercer took a chair along the wall and kept his eyes on the table, as if eye contact could make him accountable. Diane slid a single page toward me. This is interim, she said. Effective today. Limited scope. Subject to board review within 10 business days. I read it once, then again. It was not poetry, it was not an apology, it was paper. But it was paper that put my name back where they had removed it. Interim Chief Architect for Lantern Corps, authority over compliance configuration, ethical oversight over governance controls, access reinstatement to the secure environment, a compensation term that could not be waved away as a thank you gift. Graham watched my face like he was waiting for me to gloat. I did not. I picked up the pen and signed my name. Diane signed. Graham signed. The ink dried quickly. Then I looked at Diane. I will stabilize the system, I said. I will not silence it. Diane nodded once. That was as close to agreement as she ever gave. The next 2 hours were not dramatic. They were not cinematic. They were precise. I sat with the security engineer and pulled up the same dashboards they had been staring at in panic. I reviewed the flagged access patterns, the overridden approvals, the privileged accounts that had been stretched too far. I did not argue about intent. I did not accuse anyone. I adjusted controls to reflect what they claimed to be, and I documented every change. Lantern Corps stopped escalating because the environment stopped lying to it. When the final alert cleared from the screen, the room did not erupt. Nobody clapped. The silence that followed was not relief. It was awareness. They had felt what it was like to be seen by the thing they wanted to control. Graham walked me out into the hallway. You made your point, he said quietly. I turned to him. It was never a point, I replied. It was a boundary. His jaw tightened. For a second, he looked like he might argue. Then he looked away. "Board review was next week," he said. "You will be there." "I will," I said. That was the last personal sentence he tried to pull out of me for a long time. After that, our relationship became procedural: meetings, emails, approvals. He kept his title, I kept my authority. He could not erase me again without creating a record that would live longer than his smile. The board review went the way board reviews always go. People asked cautious questions. People used careful words. Diane presented the interim agreement as risk mitigation. Alyssa Kim from compliance attended, quiet but present, and when a board member asked why governance controls needed direct oversight from the architect, Alyssa answered without hesitation. "Because the integrity of the product is the integrity of the company," she said. I watched Graham's face as she spoke. He nodded like he agreed. That was the kind of man he was. He could wear agreement like a suit and take it off later. But in that moment, he had no better option. Within 2 weeks, the interim agreement became formal. Not because anyone suddenly grew a conscience, but because the company needed a story they could defend. They needed the confidence of investors. They needed Lantern Core to look like a product built on ethics, not entitlement. And to do that, they needed me, not as a ghost behind the curtain, but as the person whose name could be put on a slide without causing a lawsuit. By 2023, Lantern Core was no longer just a prototype in a windless lab. It was in the hands of real clients: regional banks, healthcare networks, a logistics company that moved half the country's groceries, the kind of places that could not afford a breach, the kind of places that would never know who I was, but would sleep better because the system did what it was built to do. We added guardrails that were not optional, governance rules that could not be overwritten by charisma, audit visibility that made shortcuts loud. Diane had to swallow her discomfort with it because she understood the alternative. Graham tolerated it because he learned that fighting me created risks he could not charm away. People in the office treated me differently, not warmly, not affectionately, differently. Some avoided me, like Evan. He'd pass me in the hallway and glance at his phone as if he had received a message at that exact moment. He stopped trying to apologize. I think he realized apologies without action were just another way to keep things comfortable for himself. Others started asking for my input earlier, before decisions were made, not because they suddenly respected me as a person, but because they respected what could happen if they pretended I did not exist. I did not take satisfaction in that. I took peace in it. The bigger change happened outside the building. My mother called an evening while I was making dinner. I could hear the television in the background and the familiar clink of her spoon against a mug. "You sound different," she said. "Different how?" I asked. "Like you're not bracing," she replied. I leaned against the counter and let her words sit in the air. I stopped trying to earn my place. I started protecting it. There was a pause, then her voice softened in a way she rarely did when she was talking about strength. "I spent a lot of my life thinking silence was the same as being good. Sometimes silence is just fear dressed up as manners." I swallowed. I had wanted her to understand for years, and hearing it now felt less like victory and more like release. I did not scream. I did not blow anything up. I just refused to disappear. "I'm proud of you," she said, and this time she did not add a warning afterwards. My brother Ryan stayed skeptical longer. He called it politics. He called it luck. He called it a headache he would never want. But even he stopped telling me to take whatever I was given. He asked more questions instead, quiet ones, curious ones, like he was trying to learn a language he had never been taught. As for Graham, karma did come for him like a storm. It came like paperwork, slowly, steadily, with consequences attached. He kept his CEO title. He still stood on stages and talked about vision. He still smiled for photos. But he lost the luxury of unchecked control. He could not make decisions alone anymore. The board asked harder questions. Compliance had a louder seat at the table. Diane's emails got longer. Everything had to be documented, justified, signed. And every time Lantern Corps generated a report, it reminded the company of a simple truth: power without accountability is risk. The strangest part was that no one had to punish Graham for me. He had created his own cage the moment he tried to turn my work into a trophy instead of a responsibility. The system I built did not hate him. It did not want revenge. It just refused to lie for him. That's what people misunderstand about stories like mine. They expect the ending to be loud. They expect someone to lose everything. They expect a villain to collapse in public. My ending was quieter than that. I did not win because I humiliated anyone. I won because my name stopped being optional. My work stopped being something other people could claim while I smiled politely in the background. I became the author of my own story again. And once you have that, once you stop bargaining for basic recognition, something settles inside you. Not bitterness, not triumph, ownership. If you're listening to this and it sounds familiar, not the technology, not the investor meetings, but the feeling of being used because you're reliable, the feeling of staying quiet because you don't want to be labeled, I want to ask you something. When was the last time you stayed silent to keep the peace, and what did that silence cost you? If you've lived through your own version of this, in your family, at work, anywhere you were expected to shrink, tell me in the comments. I read them. And if you're still in the middle of it, if you're still convincing yourself that endurance is the same as safety, stay close. There are more stories like this. And sometimes the first step to reclaiming your life is realizing you're not the only one who has been asked to disappear.